Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank
Oh,
you.
good.
Hi,
Okay,
Kari.
good to see you. Oh, see, there you are. Good to see you.
Yes, yes, indeed.
I know it's very
Indeed.
early, so I thank you for joining and
Oh, pleasure,
participating.
pleasure.
Yeah. And I see,
And I'm actually, sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
No, I was saying actually, I'm doing it from home.
Yeah.
I had planned to go to drive to work, but it would have meant to drive at 4 a.m. So I
No.
stayed at home and did it from home instead, if that's
Yes,
okay.
I would have done the same. So I can't imagine with the original time at 2 a.m. I thought we have to change this somehow for you.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
tried. And I see Ben Richardson's on too, so he's from very close to you. Ben, can you hear us okay? He's out of
Mm.
Tasmania. Hopefully he can.
Ah,
So he's been involved with the ethics specialist group and our ethics work with the Global Ecological Integrity Group, and so he's been a part of this world for a while. So I'm happy to see him here as well. But
hi,
I'm
Ben, if you can hear us.
I hope we get some numbers today, but I'm a little worried since most of the schools haven't returned yet. But I know that a lot of people have been watching the videos. So,
After, yes, excellent.
hello, welcome. And then we'll start. We'll wait till Ngozi jumps on. And then I just received a note from Julio. And he's at a conference, but he was able to find a quiet room. So he'll be jumping
Excellent.
in as well. Hi, Ngozi.
Hi, Gozi.
Hi.
It's so good to see you.
Same here. How are you?
Good. Okay, and then we'll just wait
Nice
for.
to see you again, Gozi.
Hi, Alex. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. Always a pleasure to see you.
It's
Yeah,
early in the morning there, isn't it?
Very early, yes. Is
Oh.
that because of my voice or my hair that you saying that? Or a combination of the two?
my hair. No, we just know it's early. We just
Yeah,
know.
no, I'm just kidding.
So we'll just wait for Julio. We have a few more minutes, so. And I
Yeah,
can't
sure.
thank you enough for doing this. I was just telling Alex, I was just telling him that we may not have very high numbers. The summer sessions have been kind of lower, but
Okay.
then we get quite a few requests to watch the video and links to the video. So
That's
this
fine.
will find a place within Elga. So
Excellent.
I wish you could come out to Siena. All of
Oh,
you, Ben as well.
Is there, as we were actually, is there a way actually of attaining or participating remotely?
We're going to try. Right now, Massimiliano is on holiday, so it's making some of the admin stuff a little bit difficult, like questions like that. But he gets back at the end of August, I think the 25th, so coming up. And so we hope.
Or 4 days, yeah.
Even if we can't have live back and forth, that maybe we could do some pre-recorded presentations.
yeah.
You know, and if that would interest either of you, of course, that would be wonderful. But I'll know more in about a week or so. And we do meet I meet him on September 5th for a planning meeting.
If I can actually suggest something, because I'm doing this for the conferences that I'm organizing at the end of the year. For those who cannot participate live, we're doing a combination of the two. So we have pre-recorded presentations that are so that you can actually upload them without having problems, you know, with the internet or depending on connections. And then there is the Zoom connection directly live, so that the questions can actually be made live. But if you miss the question time, it doesn't matter. So you have the presentation that it's secured, and then you have a live Q&A.
That's actually really, really smart. Maybe that's something
that might help.
Try to do, because then if the tech fails, you know, it won't fail for the presentation and then the Q&A.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really good idea. Maybe, yeah, I'll talk to him about that, because it'd be good to try. Hi, Julio. Can you hear us okay? Let's see. He's. Can you hear us? Hello? We've got 3 of the 4 working, so fingers crossed.
Yeah.
She's probably not on.
I think I just heard you, Julio. Let's see. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now without my
wonderful.
headphones. It is very noisy here.
Oh no.
So I'm gonna try to fix this.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, people is having lunch downstairs.
Okay. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes. Some people may be jumping on, and then otherwise we'll go ahead and begin.
I'm just realizing that I'm against the light. You cannot see me.
Oh, see there, that's perfect. That's much better. Thank you for doing this. I know you're at a conference, so it's not as easy.
Hi, Katie. It's Ben here.
Oh, hi, Ben. Good to hear your voice.
We're talking about the same here, so it's.
Yeah.
So it's 6 o'clock in the morning here, very early.
Yes.
You.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thanks. Hi, Jeff.
Looking forward to this.
Well, I appreciate you hanging on, Ben.
I hear you, Ben. I'm in Byron Bay, so I completely share the time zone and everything related to it.
Are you going down for an early morning swim at the beach?
It's a bit too cold, actually, still for a swim.
Oh,
And I grew up in Italy, so anything other than the mid of January here is too cold for me. But
well, a jog.
I can't even imagine Tasmania.
Yeah, no, it's wet and windy and howling and horrible.
Yeah.
You can come to Tampa. It's sunny and beautiful. We can brainstorm ethics. It'll be amazing.
Are you living in Florida?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I thought you were up in the northeast.
I was near Chicago, and now we're down in
Yeah.
Florida. So
Oh, lovely.
yeah, it's nice. But likely next year we'll be in DC. So, but that's a whole nother conversation. But all right. I think we can go ahead and begin. And like I said, particularly because of the summertime, I expected lower numbers. Jeff and Ben, thank you so much for joining us. We may have some additional people jumping on, but we do get quite a few clicks and and also requests for the video afterwards as well. And this does become a part of the body of ELGA and part of our developmental meetings. So all of this information at these courses is used, whether we have 2 amazing participants or 40, and so I greatly appreciate all of your time and this commitment on this topic. Just for purposes of the video link, I'm just going to give a little bit of background into the hosting organizations and into ELGA and this webinar program, and then a little bit into what we mean by ethics. I know we all have varying definitions and how we use it. There's ethics in academia that can sometimes be a bit more abstract. There's applied ethics, procedural, substantive. So just a little bit of background into that. And then we will go down our agenda and begin with Ngozi. So, okay, so just a little bit about my own organization, the Center for Environmental Ethics and Law. I am the executive director. Our mission is to advance the principles of environmental ethics in law and life. So that's really everything. And the way we do that is we work with local communities around the world to highlight ethics in action and also to address the challenges of acting ethically in law and policy. So what are those challenges? Everything from power imbalances to state sovereignty, to the rise of fascism and populism. So it's across the board, really. The IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law Ethics Specialist Group is also co-hosting this webinar course, and they've been around since about 1984, when my mentor helped to found that organization within IUCN to help guide their policies through an ethical lens. And it's a daily struggle, as anyone who works in ethics can imagine. And then the most recent meeting coming up with IUCN that you may already know is the Congress in Marseille. The 2020 Congress in Marseille is 11th to the 19th of June. And the Ethics Specialist Group has proposed a few workshops. So if you're interested in that, please let me or Klaus know. And then also, all of the panelists today are experts with the UN Harmony with Nature program. And that is a formal program under the auspices of the United Nations. And each year they have interactive dialogues, and it's cross-disciplinary. So you'll have everyone from lawyers to artists to philosophers that explore Earth jurisprudence, whole Earth thinking, rights of nature, etc. So it's a wonderful program. And last but not least is ELGA, the Ecological Law and Governance Association. We launched 2 years ago with 2 different events. One was in Siena and also in Montreal. And since then, our entire reason for being is to be a network of networks, to not be in competition with those principles, people, and policies that are pushing ecological law and governance, but to connect everyone, and also to help with the general development of what we even mean by ecological law and governance. So, and our next meeting is the 24th and 25th of October at the University of Siena. So if anyone is interested in attending, it'll be a small gathering, working meeting. Please also let me know. We would love to have you. So just a little bit of background into what we mean by ethics to help set the stage today. It is foundational to our justice system and rule of law. It is the inquiry into right and wrong and when responsibility attaches. It looks at the values and also what values we prioritize and how those are translated into law and policy, into action or not action. There's procedural ethics that looks at process, power, access to process and power. That would be transparency of the process itself, input from stakeholders, input from experts or sycophants, as we see in some countries. And also and if there's input from those affected by the decisions, and who has the power to make those decisions. Like, is it just for show that they bring in the voices of Indigenous peoples, or do they actually have the power to make decisions that will be affecting them? Procedural ethics also goes into conflict of interest, corruption, dark money, and unjust legal systems. Just because there's a rule of law and a legal system in place does not mean that it's a just system. Also precautionary principle in dealing with uncertainty. And then we can also jump into more substantive ethics, and that would be probably foundationally for us would be the duty not to harm. That would probably be the most foundational ethical principle for law and governance. And that's intentional harm and also desperate impact. And you see both of those happening with vulnerable peoples. Equity, fairness with implementation and access to justice, future generations and rights of nature, language and action. And now where we are today, and this is one of my last thing I'm going to say, is to protect the vulnerable people, places, and things. This is endangered species, habitats, cultures, languages. This is Indigenous peoples. This is the modern day slavery of certain consumption and production trades. It is the poor. And this is a combination of not just the duty not to harm, but also a right to exist alongside socioeconomic factors like power, money, and corruption, because we do not separate crises of conservation from crises of governance. So, saying that, I would like to turn the floor to Dr. Ngozi. Ngozi, how do you say your last name? I just want to make sure I get it correct.
I think you're just safer calling me Ngozi.
Ngozi.
So you
Okay.
so don't get your tongue twisted. Okay.
Well, I'm going to get it from you at some point. And
Yeah, sure.
she'll be speaking on the role of Indigenous peoples in ecological governance. And she is a specialist in environmental policy law and ethics. And her first and second degrees in law, a doctorate in environmental law and ethics from the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom, a diploma in international environmental law from the UN Institute of Training and Research. And she is an amazing human. So thank you so much for being here. Please begin.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katie, for the very nice words. I feel very flattered. And I also want to appreciate the organizers of this particular webinar, because I know it's very painstaking when it comes to pulling everybody together online. So I think the burden is more on your part than ours, actually, or mine. Let me speak for myself. Okay. So very quickly, my discussion is on the role of Indigenous people in ecological governance. I don't want to assume dangerously that everybody knows who Indigenous people are, because it tends to be a tired term sometimes. So I think it's good to just clarify exactly what it means, even if we all have an idea. You know, Indigenous people are people who have been in a particular region from the very beginning, before colonialism, before they were taken over or transitioned into a nation state. So I would usually like to call them the very original people of a particular area. Now, I say that with Indigenous people in Africa at the back of my mind. You know, when I talk about Indigenous people like this, I have a particular picture in my mind because I tend to relate with them from time to time. So these Indigenous peoples that we're talking about are usually called, or are habitually called, exemplars of nature for a particular reason. And that's because even up to their subsistence, up to their livelihood, is controlled by their culture. And that same culture restrains them or constrains them to live within the laws of nature. So what happens, or the consequence of that kind of restraints, is that they tend to tilt towards the sustainability of nature. That's why they're called exemplars of nature. So the question now, comes to mind very easily is, so it means that Indigenous rights should be upheld so that we can have ecological integrity, or we can have nature preserved. It will sound very simplistic, it will sound very logical to do that. But that's not actually the case, because in Africa, for example, we've had very, very recurrent situations of colonial authorities, for instance, coming to a particular Indigenous community, evacuating members of that community because they want to create parks, or because they want to create one kind of tourist attraction or the other. One would have thought, okay, if these people are they tend towards sustainability, then they should be appreciated for what they bring to the table. But that's not quite the case. Now, this is not too far back in history, and what I'm referring to is the Bushmen of the Kalahari in Botswana that were removed. In fact, the whole community was evacuated because of parks and natural attractions. Again, now, what this does is that lofty environmental policies or lofty ecological policies are very much compromised or traded for short-term developmental interests. This is very, very dangerous. And the reason why this happens increasingly, this is debatable, but as far as I'm concerned, I think I'm very confident making this statement. The reason why this happens is because our institutions, our systems as they are consistently separating humans from nature. which is very, very inimical to what indigenous people believe in. So coming down to the question of, okay, so what do you want us to do? I mean, how do you get us to involve indigenous people so that we can have these lofty environmental policies, which I am referring to? That's where governance comes in. Now, again, I won't assume that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the definition of governance.
As a specialist,
Governance,
talking about
governance clearly means that governance clearly means that norms, decision-making processes are controlled or coordinated. Traditionally, people will see governance to be the exclusive preserve of states. But if you ask any legal pluralist, correct me, Alex, if I'm wrong, but scholars of legal pluralism these days consistently agree on the fact that governance transcends state actors, even to non-state actors. And non-state actors here would include indigenous people. Now, why do we need indigenous people to be part of governance processes? That takes us to the definition of ecological governance, which I'm referring to. Ecological governance covers a range of values, covers a range of norms, covers institutions and processes, both state and non-state based, that shape entitlements to use or benefit from nature and to control her exploitation or preservation. How do we get indigenous people to join ecological governance, and why do we need indigenous people to cover ecological governance? If there is anything left of ecological governance as I have defined, then such systems are dramatically deteriorating. They are breaking down with each passing second. So it behoves on us right now to reimagine or reinvent these systems. I want to briefly read Principle 22 of the Rio Declaration of 1992 that says, indigenous people have a vital role in environmental management and development because of their knowledge and traditional practices. States should recognize and duly support their identity, culture, and interests, and enable their effective participation in the achievement of sustainable development. So it has become common knowledge. It has become an agreed fact that indigenous people play a very, very significant role when it comes to sustainable development, when it comes to sustainability of or the preservation of nature. Now, going back to my previous statement, or my statement just before this Principle 22, I said that we have dramatically deteriorating system of ecological governance, if there was anything ever left of it. So we need to reimagine, we need to reinvent these systems. Now, one way of doing that is to get indigenous people involved and deeply involved in environmental policies. But I will just give a very quick balance here. I'm not giving the impression that we should tilt to traditional ecological knowledge, or we should tilt towards fully deploying indigenous people's knowledge and forget about anything that has to do with sustainable development, or forget about anything that has to do with short-term development, mining, logging with with licenses, limited licenses, and all of that. That's not what I'm advocating. What I'm advocating is a very healthy balance, the kind of balance that you can carry on whatever development you want to carry on as the private sector, as the state, or whatever the case may be. But you should also do it with the conscience and with the consciousness that these elements of nature ought to be preserved. And it is this traditional knowledge of indigenous people that, which I am arguing or advocating, that is very, very helpful. Now, I'll just read my thoughts on why indigenous people should be, or indigenous knowledge should be deployed more and more into decision making, into environmental policies. Indigenous communities are particularly useful in an implementation or operational context because they can provide implementation tailored to specific conditions and effectively balance social, economic, and environmental pillars. This is especially true with regards to the management of natural resources, which is often best handled by indigenous and or community organizations whose livelihoods directly depend on these resources, like I mentioned earlier, and who are free from many of the conflicting demands and bureaucracies of national governments. There we must also put the balance, which I talked about, so that it doesn't look like we're tilting to another extreme. For example, many local projects facilitate small-scale agriculture through better soil management and harvesting techniques, and through improved markets and connections, which directly affect local food security and diets. Projects often develop local infrastructure, such as water and sanitation systems, schools and health clinics that directly support education and health goals. Now, the direct engagement with the local scale has a lot to offer. It has a whole lot to offer the global governance process, I tell you, because leadership for the international and national levels often emerge from such grassroots activity, which is highly neglected. Now, you see, when it comes to policy formulation, for example, especially in this part of the world, you discover that policies come out, they seem very profound. But then by the time you inquire a little more deeply, you'll discover that the stakeholders or the people who were involved in that policy formulation are every single person apart from the community, apart from the indigenous people, apart from the people who are going to be impacted by those policies. Now, it is no longer what you call it now. It's more than common knowledge, actually, to say that if you want to impact a set of people with policies, or if you want a group of people to respond positively to policies that you have formulated, then you have to, as much as possible, get those people involved. Now, in the case of indigenous people, when you're deploying the kind of knowledge they have, for instance, traditional ecological knowledge, you require free and prior informed consent and all of that and all of that. But I tell you that these people are actually the custodians of nature, and we cannot deny it. So their value for nature is quite different, and their value for nature tends towards sustainability. So if we're going to make policies that touch on sustainability, if we're going to make policies that touch on ecological integrity, then these people have to be involved. Then indigenous knowledge has to be integrated. The how is usually where the problem is. And I'll scroll down a bit to show a bit of the how. Now, here I said it is apparent that long-term, respectful, collaborative relationships between communities, governmental agencies, and academic institutions, all these are stakeholders, may help strengthen ecological governance on the global scale. However, in order for these relationships to be successful, it is important to ensure that they recognize and respect the rights of the indigenous communities involved. Genuine respect for and connection with indigenous communities is fundamental to effective community engagement and equitable integration between traditional knowledge and scientific research, for example. This includes careful analysis and understanding of the local context, leaders, networks, culture, and environment. Now, at some point during the conference during a conference, I don't know who participated or not, in June, I mentioned that one of the very strong advancements that Africa has made right now is, even if there's still a lot to be done, is in biomedicine. More and more we find professors of biomedicine collaborating with indigenous peoples just to make sure that they deploy, or just to make sure that they integrate indigenous knowledge on these botanical, what you call them, on these plants that they are using. It doesn't matter what name they are called, but they know now that the indigenous people are the ones who have the knowledge, sometimes the sole knowledge about a particular plant. And that's exactly what they need to promote the plant for whatever ailment or whatever thing it's going to solve. Now, compare that with a situation where the professor just goes with the scientific knowledge that he has, and he promotes the drug or promotes the herb or whatever it is. It's not going to be as appreciated as much as when he has the very, very, very in-depth knowledge about that particular herb and what other things it can do apart from what he has said. Now, I have a feeling I'm just blabbing now, but let me try to explain what I'm saying. It's very simple. We honestly cannot do without indigenous people. That is not to say that they are a magic bullet to ecological problems, no. But they are very, very significant part of ecological governance because of what they are governed by, because of their values, because of their stewardship mentality to nature. So it becomes very difficult to do anything effective. It becomes very difficult to try to create sustainability policies without involving these people who themselves are sustainability personified. So the essence of what I have tried to do, or the essence of this presentation actually has been that indigenous people are very significant of environmental governance if we are going to be able to restore the system of, I beg your pardon, ecological governance. If we're going to restore the system of ecological governance, if we're going to be serious about sustainability, if we're going to walk an unfeigned path of ecological integrity, then we need indigenous peoples. But at the same time, I must not fail to emphasize the fact that there is a balance. Now, indigenous people or indigenous knowledge represents sustainability and development, if you want to put it that way, or the government may represent short-term development. So the balance is very, very delicate. In a discussion I was having, I keep saying that one phrase that we can use to draw a balance is that nature can be exploited, if I may use that word. Nature can be explored. Nature can be, put whatever word you want there. But to the extent that its mechanisms, its basic mechanisms are sustained, to the extent that its basic mechanisms are maintained, So there has to be a point of maintenance when nature is being explored. So if you're going to explore nature and you discover that its basic functions will no longer be maintained, then that becomes a red spot. That becomes that means that you're exceeding the boundaries. So in the process of ecological governance, or in the process of creating environmental policies, it becomes
Did it freeze for everyone?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Oh no. Sometimes it catches right back up.
I wonder.
It looks like she. Yeah, if she shut off her audio or her video, sometimes that helps, at least on my side.
You want to send her maybe?
Same.
Yeah, I'll send her a message real quick, or a WhatsApp. I know she was just at the end of the time, and I was going to have the questions right after her, but we can always push them to the end to see if she can jump back on. Let's see. Because then she can like click off and click back in. Ngozi, can you hear us? We'll give her one more minute. That was a really great talk, though, and I wrote down all the questions too, so we'll make sure not to lose those, because I know even if she's not able to join us, she'll be able to respond to you via email. But okay, let me send one more message, and then let her know that we'll continue, and then she can come back in. We'll continue, but come back. We have questions. Okay.
Looks like she signed.
There you are.
Yes, sorry.
Good. No, I'm sorry that the system is never completely reliable. We're sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so I'm basically done. I just wanted to reiterate what I'd said before, and the fact that it's important to always draw a balance when we're talking about governance issues, when we're talking about sustainability.
Yeah.
You can't just tilt only towards the angle of indigenous people's knowledge. That's also very dangerous by itself. It comes with its own dangers and disadvantages, just as much as short-term development also comes with its own disadvantages. So there's always a place for a balance. Yes, the balance can be very delicate, but it's very critical. I believe that, I mean, with our joint efforts, with our multidisciplinarities, then we can come together and draw what kind of balance we're talking about and what the balance should entail, and it's in 3 cases. That's about it. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Ngozi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we do have a few questions. I thought what we could do is give maybe each speaker like 10 minutes afterwards. And then if there's time at the end, then we can go ahead and just open the floor. The first question was from Ben Richardson, and I'll ask the question, but Ben, if I get it wrong or you'd like to add to it, please feel free. And it was, and Ben is a lawyer. He specializes in international environmental law and ethics, and he's out of Tasmania. He asked, can traditional indigenous environmental knowledge help address modern problems such as climate change and marine plastic pollution?
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to answer that now, or?
Yeah, I would say, and then we'll just go to the next question.
Okay. Yes. Traditional indigenous knowledge actually has a very strong role to play, especially in climate change issues. I give you an example. I'm just trying to go through an example which I put down very quickly. You discover that indigenous peoples and scientists might actually be observing the same phenomenon, but they will be looking at them from different perspectives. So in that case alone, I want to say that it becomes very imperative for both of them to collaborate to be able to meet a particular global problem. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull up what I put down there about indigenous people and climate change, program and implementation, challenges. Sorry, 1 second. I'm sure I'm just wasting time.
No, I think
Okay,
a lot of it
but
is the underlying issues of what it's about. It's about adaptation to harms occurring. So whether
yes,
it's differing, you know, rainy seasons or crop rotations or even just or I'd say it's how you respond to harm, and I think that's something that speaks across cultures.
yes. As a matter of fact, scientists might just be concentrating on data collection, the very big picture, let me say so. But indigenous people on their own part might be looking at other social factors. They might be looking at other environmental factors, which scientists might not be looking at when it comes to certain decisions or certain policies. And I think if those two sets of people come together, if those two sets of ideas come together, then they can come up with a very high quality policy. I mean, I'm looking at something, but you're not from the perspective that you're looking at it from, and you're looking at something not from the perspective that I'm looking at it from. And then we both come to the table and see that, oh, both perspectives actually have good sides. So, I mean, why don't we adopt this middle ground, or why don't we adopt this kind of combination? Yes, it does have a very short impact on climate change.
Now, and then Jeff Garver had a question. He's part of our steering committee that you had met actually in Trieste.
Yes.
And he is a professor at McGill University and with the E4A, L4E program. And it was and it kind of goes into a little bit of what you're talking about, being wary of almost romanticizing the indigenous culture.
Yes.
How to build a distinction into law, if we see this, of those local communities who honor long-term commitments and connections to the local areas versus those who want to exploit it and sell it to faraway peoples or purposes, or how to address those two.
Yeah. We have very critical problems like that in Africa, for example, where people want to just, sell family land. I mean, that's a very downside of indigenous knowledge, indigenous communities. That's one of the reasons why I asked to be careful when it comes to just talking so much about them and talking in defense of them. So when it comes to those kind of negative practices, when it comes to those kind of ideologies that are not very helpful to sustainability, then there has to be this balance incorporated in however way. I mean, the kind of balance that you would incorporate in a particular case, it has to be case sensitive. That's the point I'm trying to make. Yes, the kind of balance you're asking for has to be case sensitive. So if people come and say, this is what we believe in, we're going to sell this land, or we're going to make sure this happens, and it's very inimical to what we believe in, then things have to be done wisely, but with collaboration, a lot of collaboration. You can't get indigenous people who have believed in a particular thing to say you're going to make them aware all of a sudden. Yes. So I think that certain other deliberate steps can be taken. It can be negotiation. It doesn't have to be an absolute step taken. Negotiations usually work most of the time, more often than not, but it depends on how it is approached. Sorry, let me just give a very quick example. I went for a field work somewhere, and we had a particular proposition to the group of the people, the community, telling them that this is what we want to do. We want to pass a land through this place. and this is what it's going to affect. It's going to affect your trees, it's going to affect your animals, it's going to affect, I mean, everything, a lot of things, but it's going to lead you to your farms. Now, some people were very, very happy to give the land away, and they said, you know what, do whatever you want to do. You know, we can sell you the land. We can even force people to sell you their land and all of that. You know, and then it began to look a bit funny. The picture actually changed, you know. So if you're trying to help these people, why are you helping people and hurting nature? Is there any way that we can bestride this kind of decision? And to me, it was very easy. We said that there has to be a way where the damage is not such that it is irreversible. If we cannot arrive at that kind of decision, then we cannot go on. So those are the kind of things I'm talking about. You get to a stage where you can negotiate.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Jeff or Ben, did you have a quick follow-up to the questions, or we're good? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
No, Gary, thank you very much for the answers.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ngozi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so next we'll move on to Alex, or Dr. Alessandro Pelizon. He will be speaking on Earth laws, rights of nature, and legal pluralism. And we thank him very much for getting up very, very early in Australia. Dr. Pelizon is a senior lecturer in the School of Law and Justice at Southern Cross University, where he also serves as course coordinator of the master's program and coordinator of the honors program. He completed his studies in Italy, specializing in comparative law and legal anthropology with field research in the Andes, and his PhD thesis focused on native title, legal pluralism in the Illawarra. Did I say that? Illawarra. Right now, he's doing all of his work exploring the emerging discourse on rights of nature, wild law, and earth jurisprudence. And I just met him recently in the last year or so, and I'm very happy I did. And welcome and thank you so much, Alessandro, for joining us.
Thank you, Kari, and absolutely likewise. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to be part of this network, particularly, first of all, following Ngozi's brilliant presentation. I've known Ngozi for a while and for a few months now, and I had no doubt that of the brilliancy of the presentation that I would have listened to. And not only you fulfilled the expectation, but you went beyond them as usual in Ngozi. So thank you for the presentation and setting it up as a very hard act to follow. Thank you, Kari, for organizing this and making this possible. So this is an absolutely precious exchange. And I would like to begin in the traditional way in which Australian Aboriginal people begin any of their exchanges, by acknowledging the countries that we are inhabiting today. And the concept of country for Aboriginal people of Australia is a rather complex concept. It goes far beyond a geopolitical idea, a geopolitical entity. In the words of anthropologist Deborah Rose, country is the nexus of their being. It can be described as the matrix of interconnectedness, identity, and relationship. In the words of my mentors, particularly Annie Barbara Nicholson, the country is the total sum of all the beings and phenomena with which we share our particular space today. All the beings and phenomena that share the space among all of us, irrespective of our digital communication, but also all the ones that inhabit the space that we, each one of us, live in this particular time. The country also the relationships with and among those beings and phenomena. And country is also the stories, the total sum of the stories within which these relationships are contained and construed. And so with this in mind, I'd like to pay my respect to the owners and the custodians of these stories, the ones that Aboriginal people of Australia call the elders, the ones who were, the ones who are, and the ones who are yet to be. And since it's not just a space or a place in space, but it's also a place in time, I'd like to acknowledge your time, both the present time, the synchronous time that we are sharing right now, and the asynchronous time that people are sharing at a later stage. So with that in mind, I'd like to begin my talk by taking us to the ontological intersection underpinning the legal pluralistic issues that Ngozi so beautifully unpacked in her presentation. And so I'm going to share now some slides just to help us, or to guide me in this discussion, and I will stop the slides immediately thereafter. So let me know if they are now. If so, let me start from the beginning. Yes. Are they visible? Can I just ask you if you can see the slides? Yes, perfect. So let me just hide myself as well. Yes, hide myself so that it will be just my voice, my disembodied voice guiding this. So when Christopher Stone asked his provocative question at the end of his property law lecture in 1972, should trees have standing? He could scarcely have predicted how his suggestion would have affected the dominant legal paradigm in decades to come. In his own words, quote, "This suggestion has since assumed a modest but apparently enduring place in contemporary environmental law and ethics, quite out of proportion to its actual impact on the courts. What began as a self-described thought experiment in the halls of US legal academia in the early 70s, however, has certainly become a lived reality in a number of jurisdictions, and much more than a theoretical possibility for many activists and scholars alike." Stone had asked, what would a radically different law-driven consciousness look like? How would a posture in law affect a community's view of itself? Well, the answer to his question was fully articulated by eco-theologian and self-described earth scholar Thomas Berry, who called, quote, "for a jurisprudence that would provide for the legal rights of geological and biological, as well as human components of the earth community," end of quote. Deep ecology, which had profoundly influenced Thomas Berry, was, as we all know, an environmental philosophy that had argued for decades that nature had intrinsic value in and of itself, regardless of any human utility to it. Thomas Berry argued that if we are all part of an interconnected and interdependent system of beings and phenomena, then the well-being of each member of the system is connected to and dependent from the well-being of the system as a whole. And thus, the safeguard of the well-being of the system is more important than that of each individual member of the system, such as humans. So in other words, an ecocentric perspective is preferable, at least in long-term ecological terms, to an anthropocentric one. Berry called, together with Cormac Callinan, called this an earth jurisprudence. And together with other authors, I have embraced the term that we should move beyond the planetary boundaries suggested by the term earth, and so have named it an ecological jurisprudence. Cormac Callinan described this emerging branch of legal theory as a philosophy of law and human governance that is based on the idea that humans are only one part of a wider community of beings. And from this perspective, human societies will only be viable and flourish if they regulate themselves as part of this wider Earth community, and do so in a way that is consistent with the fundamental principles that govern how the universe functions. Now, this emerging Earth or ecological jurisprudence obviously transformed nature from an object, or cast nature from an object of rights in law as a subject of and or with rights. The consequences of this being the many, many successful legislative initiatives, constitutional provisions, or judicial cases that have unfolded over the past decade, or almost 15 years now, actually, starting with the first ordinance in Temecula Borough with Seldev, up to the more recent recognition of the Klamath River by the Yurok Nation in the US as a legal entity or as a legal person. Now, the terms used are many: rights of nature, earth jurisprudence, wild law, earth law or earth laws, ecological law and governance, or as I said, ecological jurisprudence. All these terms represent different articulation or semantic articulation of the same principle. But within this movement, there has been indeed the emergence of a number of issues, because while inspiring in its undeniable momentum, it's particularly significant, this emergence of an ecological jurisprudence, for the theoretical possibilities that it entails. However, it is also inhabiting a very protean and uncertain terrain. So as someone has suggested elsewhere, quote, nature and rights are contested concepts with the negotiable meanings. And so it's important that scholars and activists within an ecological jurisprudence be fully aware of the fact that this terrain may be already heavily inscribed by humanist precepts of what rights and nature consist of. I was speaking of rights of nature, rights awarded to nature, or rights as used as a strategic tool. Are we speaking of nature's rights or of human responsibilities, as the Bolivians suggest? Furthermore, what is nature? Is a car natural? Is a car more natural than a fruit salad, the typical meal of anyone inhabiting here Byron Bay? Well, if we look at them, the individual components are actually both the results of human intervention. Strawberries of the sort that you see do not exist in a natural state. These components are also recombined by human activities. They do not exist in and of themselves. But what about personhood? What does it mean to speak of nature as a person? Who speaks of nature for nature? What does it mean to construe legal obligations toward nature? Is it ever possible, as Aldo Leopold said, to think like a mountain? How do we know ever what nature wants? Who has agency on behalf of nature? What rights are to be balanced? Now, far from being daunting, these ideas have already invited a plethora of interdisciplinary reflections. Jane Bennett challenges the binary opposition of life and matter in her quest for a political ecology of things. Levi Bryant, in The Democracy of Objects, develops a realist ontology where he suggests that reality is composed entirely of objects. Latour also challenges or suggests that ideas of nature are historically situated constructions of human consciousness. However, more importantly, these ideas have also been articulated, and I would say for millennia, exactly as Ngozi said before, by most of the legal orders of the planet throughout history and still present today. The ones that, according to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, are often called indigenous legal orders or indigenous pieces of legislation. For example, for the Bunun people of central Taiwan, there is no single word that translates the concept of nature. Rather, two words are used synergistically. Taki, to describe the totality of the known universe, and asan, to describe human interactions with it. Now, the word asan literally can be translated in two ways. Firstly, as home, as nature is the place that humans inhabit. And secondly, as excrement, because nature is the place that humans also pollute. And the combinations of these two literal meanings indicate that together with the privilege of inhabiting a place, of inhabiting a country, comes the responsibility of maintaining it. When I asked Uncle Dutch, a Yuin man from the Illawarra area of southeastern Australia, what it means to be an Indigenous person, he said, "That's my nature." And then he added, when I say this, people look at it as my personality. And yes, that is my personality, but also understand that by nature is the natural environment right beside you. When I say that's my nature, I'm talking about the natural environment out there, because that's my nature: the ocean, the bush, everything that surrounds me, the colors of the flowers, the wind in the trees, the smell of the plants, the sound of the water running, a goanna that I can spot from 100 yards off, observing his movements while he's observing mine. Indigenous people who are connected to country will look at all of that because they're the spirits of our people, the very trees, the very rocks, the mountains that we walk on. We walk on our spirits. That is my nature. This sense of interconnectedness with nature, of identification with and respect for a place of belonging, well, this is country for Aboriginal peoples of Australia. And this is encoded in the words with which traditional Hawaiians declare their identity. I Hawaii, I am Hawaii. This sense of identity with the earth, with nature, with country, whereby individual identity and country of belonging are one and the same, is fully realized in what Daves defines as a sacred geography. For example, for the people of the Anaconda of the northeastern Amazonian basin, rivers are not simply a way of transport and communication. Rather, they are the very veins of the earth, the paths along which the ancestors traveled at the beginning of time. At the same time, the numerous sacred sites articulated along these pulsating corridors of both life and myth are not only memorials of or symbols of distant mythic events, but rather they are living places that eternally inform the present. Equally, for Australian Aboriginal people, the entire natural world is saturated with meaning and cosmological significance. Every rock and waterfall embodies one level of perception. Every plant, every animal, every rock is a distinct physical representation of the same spiritual essence that connects, uninterrupted, all beings, thus making the distinction between humans and the rest of nature utterly devoid of meaning. Now, this understanding of the ontological depth of Indigenous worldviews has been acknowledged since the beginning of the emergence of ecological jurisprudence. Thomas Berry himself wrote that, quote, "One of the most striking things about Indigenous peoples is that traditionally they live in conscious awareness of the stars in the heavens, the topography of the region, the dawn and sunset of the moon, and seasonal sequence. They live in a world of subject, that is, a world of inner expression shared by every mode of being, not a world of objects. Nothing is without its identity, its dignity, its inner spontaneity. Everything has its sacred dimension, which must not be violated." End of quote. Abram equally writes that, quote, "Many authors have come to recognize that long-established Indigenous cultures often display a remarkable solidarity with the lands that they inhabit, as well as a basic respect or even reverence for the other species that inhabit those lands. Such cultures, much smaller in scale and far less centralized than modern Western civilization, seem to have maintained a relatively homeostatic or equilibrial relation with their local ecologies for vast periods of time, deriving their necessary sustenance from the land without seriously disrupting the ability of the earth to replenish itself." End of quote. And Cormac Cullinan also writes, quote, "that it appears that certain cultures did manage to evolve laws and other means of regulating human conduct that enabled them to live successfully over long periods of time as part of a wider community of living and non-living beings. To me, this suggests that they probably know the things that we don't, and which would be helpful for us to know." End of quote. Now, while this is very much true, it is also true that not only theoretically this ontological depth and this normative significance has been recognized by scholars within the field of ecological jurisprudence, but also Indigenous voices have profoundly influenced a number of initiatives. As of the initiatives that I've listed here, that by no means, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's a significant list of the main milestones of the past 15 years, we can actually see that almost half of them have been profoundly influenced by indigenous voices. From the Pachakutik movement in Ecuador, shaping the new constitution of Montecristi, to the Aymara choices of President Evo Morales in Bolivia, to the voices of the Maori Iwi in New Zealand, in Te Urawara, in the Whanganui discussions, from the voices of the indigenous community, the Aboriginal communities around along the Yarra near Melbourne in Australia, to the many nations in the US, the Ponca Nation, the White Herd Band of Ojibwe, or the Yurok Nation. However, while that is true, it is also true that at present, most indigenous cultures live in a condition of asymmetry of power, as Ngozi really clearly articulated before. The horizon of the cultural practices of indigenous people are defined and determined by the colonial powers established on their ancestral territories. And even more subtly, our different all in colonial positions. Stephen Luke coined the term environmentality to articulate the claim that most environmentalist movements now operate as a basic manifestation of governmentality in a Foucauldian sense. And Sepek argues that environmental paradigms are subtly forced upon indigenous actors in a manner similar to that of governments with their subjects. The example of the San, the Bushmen people of the Kalahari Desert being moved away from their ancestral land for so-called environmental reasons. It's a very good example of that. The great value of an ecological jurisprudence, however, is that it invites us to think that issues of social justice and of environmental sustainability, of ontological inquiry and normative organization are not separate nor separable, but rather part of intellectual, existential, and ethical continuum shared by all men on the planet. It is thus not possible to engage with ecological jurisprudence without engaging with deep, or as Griffith called it, strong legal pluralism. And so issues of sovereignty are thus central to the project ecological jurisprudence as issues of biodiversity protection. Notwithstanding this asymmetry of power, it is heartening to see that indigenous groups have displayed an amazing resilience and have embraced the articulation of an ecological jurisprudence as an interface between colonial and pre-colonial legal orders, leading to a novel form of legal pluralism that is taking shape as we speak. In New Zealand, the Whanganui River was articulated as a legal person for the benefit not of the traditional iwi, but rather for the benefit of the Pākehā, the non-Maori people of New Zealand. And equally, in the US, the last few years have seen an incredible emergence of ecological jurisprudential initiatives on the part of tribal nations. The Ponca nations that has recognized the rights of Mother Earth in their constitution, the White Earth Band of the Ojibwe recognizing the rights of Manumin or wildlife, the Yurok nation declaring the Klamath River as a legal person. And in the US, the strategic nature of this legal pluralistic approach is very visible. While rights of nature movements, mainstream rights of nature movement in the US have come under attack and have been criticized in court, the Lake Eyre case in Toledo being a paramount example, US constitutional law places tribal law beyond the reach of state powers and allows tribal nations to act as both innovators and custodians, thus fulfilling a traditional role, that of custodians of wisdom, in a contemporary legal setting. So this is an example, these are all examples, however, of how legal pluralism is inherent and inherently inscribed in any ethical pursuit of an ecological jurisprudence. The common ground that we all look for is always here. Cormac Callinan always says that the common ground that we always look for is always here beneath our feet. And so let me conclude with the words with which Wade Davis begins his book, The Wayfinders. One quote, "One of the intense pleasures of travel is the opportunity to live amongst peoples who have not forgotten the old ways, who still feel their past in wind, touch it in stones polished by rain, taste it in the bitter leaves of plants. Just to know that in the Amazon, jaguar shaman still journey beyond the Milky Way. The myths of the Inuit elders still resonate with meaning, that the Buddhists in Tibet still pursue the breath of the Dharma, is to remember the central revelation of anthropology, the idea that the social world in which we live does not exist in some absolute sense, but rather is simply one model of reality, the consequence of one set of intellectual and spiritual choices that our particular cultural lineage made, however successfully, many generations ago. All these people teach us that there are other options, other possibilities, other ways of thinking and interacting with the earth. This is an idea that can only fill us with hope." Thank you. I'll try to, sorry, I'm trying to stop sharing.
Oh, okay. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Alessandro. That was beautiful. That was thoughtful. That was thorough. To help with time, we do have one question. Another one we may save to the very end if there's time at the end, or I can email it to you. It's from Jeff, who had to jump away. And just quickly, a point of order that Zoe from Earth Thrive would like to learn more about the EU initiatives from one of your slides. And if you're comfortable, I could share her email address with you.
Sure.
Sure. Okay, great. So this is a question from Ben Richardson. Can non-Indigenous people, such as ELGA members, share this deep ecology cosmology? How can non-Indigenous cultivate a similar cosmology?
That's a beautiful question, Ben. And it's at the core of, it's an epistemological question, I think. And the epistemological question actually goes to the nature of how we interact with reality. If we believe reality to be nothing more than a collection of objects, if we have a materialistic ontology and the epistemology that follows, then the way of interacting with the earth that I've just described is nothing more than a cultural construct. It has no bearing to the interaction with reality, with the material reality, other than what is construed in culture. If, however, we have a non-materialist ontology, one that believes that nature has agency, irrespective of how that agency is construed. But if nature is not just a passive object, but a passive object, or even a passive subject, but it's an active subject, if nature can speak, then the capacity to engage with the language of nature obviously has been articulated and maintained over millennia by indigenous cultures. But that communication exists irrespective of the language within which it is construed. And so in that sense, we interact with the world constantly. We communicate with the world constantly. The language of nature, and I'm using this poetic metaphor to describe it, is a language that we all speak by virtue of existence. What the legal pluralistic, what the necessity for legal pluralism suggests is that there are many voices that construe this relationship, and some of them have the wisdom of the ages. Now, that wisdom of the ages does not belong exclusively to our culture, however. There's a wealth of richness and a plethora of rich examples within what I would call the Western philosophical tradition of similar construct. St. Francis' articulation of the personal relationship with nature as God is an example of that. The idea of the Asian goddess or of Scandinavia, embodiment of natural prince himself. Poseidon, for example, is not, or I should go back, Pontus is not the god of the sea. Pontus, the ancestor of Poseidon, is the sea itself. To relate with the sea is to relate with the god. So I think there's a depth of ontological possibilities that exist in the totality of the human traditions of the world. There's this idea of nature as just a collection of material objects is an obsession of just one single particular philosophical lineage.
Mhm.
And I think to re-embrace that ontological depth is the task actually that ecological jurisprudence are faced with. I hope actually I'm answering the question.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, Ben, sorry. Absolutely. Ben, did you have any follow-up? And then we'll turn to our third and final speaker.
No, just to thank the speakers. It's been lovely to listen, and I'll still stay on. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ellie Sandiford.
And thank you, Kathy.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm so happy you went into Greek mythology, which is kind of my little nerd world. So that made me very happy at the end. Okay, and now we will turn to our last speaker, Dr. Julio Prieto from Ecuador. I'd like to sincerely thank Maria Mercedes Sanchez from the Harmony with Nature program for recommending you to speak today. Because wow, I'll go ahead and read your entire bio. He is an Ecuador lawyer specialized in environmental law, indigenous rights, and rights of nature. He holds a master's degree on environmental management from Yale, focused on global environmental governance and ecology of restoration. Since 2006, he has been working as a litigant attorney for Ecuadorian indigenous and farmers communities fighting Chevron over oil pollution in the Ecuadorian Amazon. At this position, he was part of the team that achieved the historical victory and award of more than $9.6 billion. He is currently helping his clients to collect that payment from Chevron and planning the ecological restoration efforts of 400,000 hectares. So thank you so much for being here. It's a true honor with all of our panelists, and I look very much to hearing from you. So please begin.
Thank you, Kathy and group. Those previous presentations, Alessandro and Erdnik, were just amazing. So I hope to meet the bar. The bar has been set very high to me, but let's see. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's there.
Well, okay, cool.
Okay.
I'm going to be talking 20 minutes or less because I don't know if any moment they're going to come and knock on my door at 2:30 because there's another meeting here, I think. I'm still in someone's office. So I'm going to use very sharply the next 20 minutes to address the active industry. It's a complex issue. And as you will see, it is a showcase scenario to analyze, first, the potential of rights of nature to address some of the problems constraining indigenous people, and second, to pose the question of what can be done to increase its enforcement. So let's go to the first questions about rights of nature potential. Well, the first thing ourselves is, what are rights of nature good for? What can rights of nature do for the most vulnerable people? You know, what has improved already or what can be improved with rights of nature? So first of all, we need to know what are rights of nature. I made some research a few years ago because you know, we have them in our constitution, but our constitution relies on some scientific issues such as the cycle of nutrients, the cycle of energy, but it also recognizes ancient knowledge as a source of valid scientific information, if you could say so, because they are equivalent according to our constitution. So before seeing which improvements can be achieved under sustainable development goals, let's see it from a legal and academic point of view. Legally talking, rights of nature can help the indigenous and also other vulnerable people to better address the clash with extractive industries in their territories. Why? Well, because extractive industries, which often are transnational corporations operating in developing countries, take advantage of the lack or weakness of environmental legislation. So they know they can do their business without much problem. Since rights of nature are not based on environmental regulations, but on the balance and respect of ecosystems balance, any lack of environmental legislation can be filled by rights of nature. It means setting limits where environmental laws have failed. For example, this is a new case. We filed a few weeks ago a new constitutional claim against the biggest mining project in Ecuador. There's a Chinese mining company who is building 2 huge dams to hold millions of tons of toxic mine tailings. What's the problem? That in doing so is deploying practices that are illegal in most countries, but are not regulated in Ecuador. These practices have led to huge disasters in other countries because they are not safe, but they are cheap. So they are the first choice for companies, especially if this issue is not regulated. According to experts on our side, there is a probability of them's failure so high that it can be considered imminent. So in this case, it will be impossible to challenge it from the legal point of view because they are not breaking any law, which is amazing, I know. There is no law. So we look for jurisdictional, constitutional intervention to get some sort of injunction to stop them from building these dams until a commission of experts approves its construction under international safety standards. How can we do this if the mining company is not breaking the law? Because their operation is threatening to break constitutional protected natural cycles. I don't want to take all my time to discuss this case, but if anyone is interested in knowing more, feel free to contact me at the end of this. Well, also legally speaking, and I love this part, if we get to recognize a universal declaration of rights of nature, somehow a binding treaty, it can help communities to defeat transnational corporations' impunity system. This is also a different matter that we can talk later if you want. But it's very important, and the thing is that rights of nature can help to address the problem of transnational corporations' responsibility with human rights even. Then, academically speaking, it is important to highlight the explicit recognition of different ways of knowledge and empowering of local ecological knowledge in Ecuadorian Constitution. Ancient knowledge is recognized as valid as Western knowledge. However, this recognition is only theoretical. I haven't seen a case when this ancient knowledge is presented at the court and it's given the same value as an expert report. So we have to work a lot on this, and I'm gonna give a few advices at the end. Now, if we consider the sustainable development goals, we have economics advantages for vulnerable people since different ways of development are recognized, which means different metrics can be used to measure well-being. For example, the Sarayaku people in Ecuador, they live in the jungle. They don't have electricity and they don't need it. They are very happy in the jungle. They believe it is fully developed. It provides them all they need. However, if we apply conventional Western metrics to their situation, they are poor people because they don't have basic services. They don't have any money, any income. So a Western person could be tempted to help them, to bring development to them. But well, as I told you, they consider themselves fully developed and they don't want any kind of help. Why is this important? Because we're trying to bring together two worlds, which I'm going to talk about really soon. Environmental peace, okay. Environmentally speaking, making peace with Earth will be good for environment. I mean, there's no discussion about it. If we take care of nature, we're taking care of environment. It doesn't work the same way backwards. We could be taking care of human environment, but not that much of nature itself. And here's where this huge difference comes between the environment and nature. Most people believe they are the same. But environment, when we talk about environment or environmental laws, we're talking about human environment. Environmental laws are only taking care of human environment well-being. I mean, like air quality, water quality, they are only taking into account human needs, not nature, not the balance and stuff. So, well, in any case, by taking care of nature, I'm pretty sure that environmental standards will also be met. So finally, and this is the part I love the most, I don't know if you're familiar with the eagle and the condor prophecy, which is it's a prophecy that can be found from Argentina to Mexico, and even some indigenous people in the States and in Canada also believe in it. And it talks about how different people from Earth took two different paths: the path of the condor and the path of the eagle. The path of the eagle were taken mostly by Western civilizations, looking to progress, to develop themselves based on science, and they are mainly masculine societies. On the other hand, we have the condor societies, which are more feminine, intuitive, artistic, and they are looking forward to live in harmony with nature, not to dominate it. Well, so the prophecy says that after the fifth Pachacutic, which is happening now, the eagle will look back at the condor and recognize it for what he knows, for what he is, which is something that is not happening yet. I mean, it's starting to happen. You know, rights of nature are something relatively new for Western academics, lawyers, but it's just something we are discovering. This has been on Earth for centuries before we name it as rights of nature. That's the eagle looking at the condor and recognizing the value of its knowledge. And well, according to the prophecy, this is supposed to save the world. The eagle being able to recognize the other, to recognize the value of their way of living. I'm confident that Rise of Nature has the potential to fulfill this prophecy. I believe it's happening. There are many debates, many conferences being organized, and it's always lovely to see all these lawyers, all these experts next to indigenous leaders trying to talk the same language, but we need translations, and that's what we're doing, and I think we're doing just fine in that part. So what's the problem? What's the problem? Why rights of nature are not just accepted by everyone and like a panacea? Let's keep on living on that. Well, the first problem, I think, is lack of political will. It's not a very good business, rights of nature, because it requires to stop treating nature as a commodity. It requires not to take more than we need. And our systems, our capitalist system, is based on generating excellent and appropriating this surplus to create more capital. And well, you know the story. Everything is lost. I believe that rights of nature recognition is an irreversible process, which means that rights of nature are locked into society. There's been many cases that allow me to say this. Many ways of recognitions are being deployed to protect ecosystems. Alessandro did a wonderful job there explaining some of them. But if we think about this, it's not necessary to have a constitutional protection as in Ecuador or a legal protection as in Bolivia. Colombia is doing a great work by providing jurisdictional recognition of rights of nature, several cases, the same in Indonesia. And it's also happening at the local level in the United States, as we just heard a few minutes ago. So I believe that we are in a point that, for example, if we have a new constitution in Ecuador and rights of nature are taken out of it, they are gonna still stick into society, into academics, into lawyers. And so we're not going back. The problem that I see is that we are moving very slow. So to improve chances of success by enforcing rights of nature rational, I recommend to develop strategies to influence policymakers under the four paths of influence, not just the regulative of normative pathways, which we the lawyers love, but also the market pathway, and especially, most importantly, the direct participation pathway, because this one requires the participation of the real experts, which are the indigenous communities detenting ancient ecological knowledge. Well, I believe that ends with my time. We have very few minutes, so I'm gonna end it there so we can have a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julio. Thank you. Okay, we have just about 3 or 4 minutes left. I'll just go ahead and open up the floor to anyone if they have any questions for Julio, first and foremost, and then any of our speakers as well. Any final questions or comments?
So David Boyd has written a lot about environmental rights and constitutions, and he says that they can make quite a lot of difference. So Ecuador would be one of those examples, but there are countries like my own where it's virtually impossible to get that kind of constitutional change. So, you know, what would be your advice to a country like Australia where it's very difficult? The United States would be another example. It's very difficult to replicate the sort of innovations that some countries have made, but for others politically, it's just impossible. We have to find another route.
Yeah, and that will be the bottom-up route. That's an excellent question. You know, in Ecuador, rights of nature became a reality because of a political moment, a political opportunity. We were enacting a new constitution, and politicians were looking to bring all support they could. So they bring rights of nature and a bunch of other stuff. So this was a top-bottom approach. But if we go from below, which is what's happening in the rest of the world, we have more chances of developing this. I mean, I know it will be very difficult to have the government and politicians in Australia to accept rights of nature as part of their legal body.
Mm-hmm.
But local communities can organize themselves and start this process from below. You know, there are many examples of this in the United States, or it can be even done at the private level using some financial structures, for example, to put a forest, some land into a trust. I'm sorry, I wasn't ready for this. And well, and yes, I mean, bottom line is that you don't need to rely on constitutional recognition of rights of nature, not even legal recognition. You know, in Colombia, they don't have any of those, but they are winning cases. They are getting their judges, their judicial system to recognize them. So let's keep all the doors open and plan for an integral strategy to be able to influence those policy makers, and that has more chance of success if we start this process from below.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. I think perfect ending timing. I try to respect everyone's time with these courses. Thank you so much to our panelists, to Ngozi, Alex, and Julio. I'm a bit biased, but I think that this was the best webinar course so far this year. And I'll go ahead and put the recording up on our webinar homepage. And if you could please share any of your PowerPoints or slides, because I know I've already had some requests from them as well. That would be a great help. And for anyone who'd like to join us next month, I believe the topic, and you'll have to check the webinar series homepage, is on advocacy and activism. So putting our feet to the street. So, all right, any final words or anything before we go?
Can I just thank both Ngozi and Julio for for being such two wonderful co-panelists. I really agree. That was a real honor for me to work with them on this. And once again, I want to thank you, Kari, for making this possible. So thank you.
You make it possible. All right. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch, and email me for anything at all. I'm here for any of you. Thank you to the participants that showed up as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kati.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.